The Galactic Peace Academy orbited a dead world, a planet-long stripped of atmosphere and memory. It hung silent, a black pearl against the blue swirl of nebulae, chosen for its neutrality. No species had ever lived there. No blood had ever been spilled upon its stone. That was the point. It was meant to be a place without ghosts. A place where young minds from across the galaxy could train, unshaped by history's pain. And then, the humans arrived. They came in small numbers, less than 100 among tens of thousands. Uniforms plain, movements measured, expressions unreadable. While others chattered and postured, the humans stood in formation, silent, patient, eyes forward. Their presence unsettled the academy before they even spoke a word. No one had expected them to accept the invitation to join the Galactic Alliance's Peace Corps training program. The humans were still new to the galactic stage, a frontier race, war-torn and unrefined. But their recent victories against the Vakshar incursions had made them difficult to ignore. The instructors, veterans of centuries-long peace, had studied the human dossiers. They found contradiction after contradiction. Anatomy designed for survival. Psychology molded by conflict. Records full of wars fought not for territory, but for ideals, or sometimes, for nothing at all. And yet, here they stood. Calm. Respectful. Quiet. It was their quiet that frightened the others. For most species, youth was loud, full of exuberance and arrogance. But the human cadets watched, listened, learned. Their eyes, deep and old, studied every motion, every hesitation of those around them. The Allaran cadets joked that humans must communicate through telepathy. The Sorith claimed their silence was a dominance display. The Tkarni avoided them altogether, muttering that no species so young should look so tired. The instructors noted it, too. They whispered among themselves in the faculty chambers, behind sealed glass walls. "Perhaps they're shy," said one. "Or still traumatized by their wars," said another. "Maybe they're plotting," whispered a third. None dared to ask the humans directly. Not yet. In the training halls, the difference was even clearer. While other species debated tactics or argued over simulations, the human squads moved with eerie coordination. They didn't shout commands. They didn't boast when they won. They didn't curse when they lost. They simply adapted. Every error became a lesson, every failure a quiet recalibration. They never repeated mistakes. Instructors began using human teams as control groups in exercises, assuming they'd perform average. They were wrong every time. Humans didn't dominate through brute strength or speed, though they had both. They dominated through unpredictability, through improvisation, through something no data model could predict, instinct. When the human cadets were given simulated weapons, they used the environment instead. When denied technology, they built it. When isolated, they communicated through improvised signals. One instructor remarked that humans seem to treat every disadvantage as a challenge to overcome, not a condition to accept. Rumors spread. The Allaran whispered that humans were genetically engineered predators. The Sorith claimed their eyes could see beyond visible spectra. The Tkarni began referring to them by a new name, the Quiet Hunters. At first, it was said in jest. Then it became a warning. Because when the instructors began running combat drills, real ones, with pain feedback enabled, something changed. The humans didn't flinch. Not once. A Sorith cadet's plasma bolt burned through a human trainee's arm during a reflex test. The human looked at the wound, clamped it with his other hand, and continued the exercise. No scream. No complaint. Only focus. The medics called it unnatural tolerance. The instructors called it disturbing composure. The other cadets called it insanity. But the humans just called it discipline. In the following weeks, incidents multiplied. One human rescued 3 Allering cadets from a failed zero-gravity simulation, using nothing but a tether cable and bare hands, suffering vacuum frostbite in the process. Another rerouted the Academy's training grid to prevent a catastrophic overload, violating 10 protocols, saving thousands. Each act was met not with pride, but quiet apology. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," they'd say. Always calm. Always polite. The instructor started noticing something else: the way the humans reacted to history lectures. While other species grew restless during lessons on galactic wars long past, the humans listened intensely. They memorized troop movements, casualty figures, diplomatic outcomes. When asked why, one human replied softly, "Because those who forget their wars are doomed to repeat them." It wasn't a quote from their species. It was older. Older than their alliance with the stars. The Academy psychologists began submitting reports. "Signs of collective trauma," they wrote. "Extreme cultural conditioning toward conflict and survival. Possible post-cataclysmic species syndrome." But the reports didn't explain everything. For every trace of darkness, there was light. Humans helped other cadets with training. They shared rations with those who forgot theirs. They volunteered for cleanup duties after drills. They were courteous, almost self-effacing, as if ashamed of something unseen. That contradiction puzzled the instructors most of all. How could a species capable of so much violence also show such empathy? The answer lay in the Academy's restricted archives, a section few ever accessed, labeled Human Combat Logs, Class Red. Only high-ranking officers could view them. They contained humanity's true history. Unfiltered. Unforgiven. But the instructors didn't know that yet. They only knew the surface: statistics, summaries, sanitized reports. Numbers that could not capture the agony behind them. Until the day one curious instructor decided to see for herself. Her name was Viereth, a Zelari from the water worlds of the Outer Rim. She had studied psychology for 3 centuries, and believed no species was beyond comprehension. When she looked at humans, she saw contradiction worth understanding, not fearing. So one evening, after class dismissed and the corridors dimmed, she accessed the archives. Her credentials weren't enough to open the full files, but enough to unlock the summaries. She began to read. The first log was titled, "The Siege of Earth, Year 0 Galactic Contact." She expected statistics. Instead, she found horror. Cities burning. Oceans turned red. Humans fighting invaders with improvised weapons, outnumbered 1,000 to 1, and winning. She scrolled further. The Fall of Europa Base. The Martian Rebellion. Operation Ashen Sky. Each entry was more impossible than the last. Humans facing extinction after extinction, and never surrendering. They fought until the seas boiled and skies collapsed. They fought when they were starving. They fought when their command structure fell apart. They fought even when victory was mathematically impossible. They didn't always win. But they never stopped. And in between those battles were words that shook her to her core. Lines written by soldiers, scientists, medics, fragments of human thought preserved across millennia. If no one else stands, I will. We are the shield. The line. The light. If this is the end, let it end with us fighting. Viereth closed the file, trembling. She looked at the classroom surveillance feed, the humans sitting quietly at their desks, heads bowed, listening to a lecture on galactic ethics. So still. So silent. As if they carried centuries on their shoulders. That night, she couldn't sleep. Because for the first time in her long career, Viereth, scholar of minds, healer of trauma, realized something her studies had never prepared her for. The humans were not quiet because they were shy. They were quiet because they had seen what happens when the noise begins. They were quiet because silence was the only way to hear the ghosts. The following cycle began like any other. The Academy's artificial sunrise bathed the halls in gentle gold. Cadets gathered in their formations, instructors reviewed schedules, and the galaxy's brightest youth prepared to study peace. But peace was about to end. Instructor Viereth had filed a confidential report the previous night. She had not intended to start an investigation, only to express concern. Yet, within hours, her report had reached the Council Liaison Office, and from there, the Directorate of Species Affairs. By dawn, the humans were under review. It began quietly. Subtle scans of their dormitories. Surveillance algorithms monitoring their speech patterns, posture, biometrics. Every smile. Every still moment. Every silence. By midday, whispers spread through the campus like static in the air. The humans are under audit. They've been hiding something. They're not cadets. They're spies. The humans said nothing. They attended their lessons. They cleaned their equipment. They trained. Always calm. Always polite. But their stillness had changed. It was heavier now, like the hush before a storm. That evening, the Council's encrypted channels carried an emergency directive. The Galactic Peace Academy was to unseal File Archive H-Class, humanity's complete combat record. All of it. Every war. Every atrocity. Every victory carved in blood and ash. The order was clear. To assess the psychological risk of integrating humanity into the galactic core. For the first time in centuries, the Academy's secure chamber lights turned crimson. The doors sealed with magnetic locks. Only high command instructors and representatives of the Council were permitted entry. Viereth stood among them. Her scales trembled under the cold light. The file core rose from the floor, a crystalline sphere pulsing faintly blue. The director keyed the sequence. And the room filled with ghosts. Not literal ones, but holographic projections. Scenes so vivid they made the air seem to burn. Earth, during its final stand. A world half in ruin, half in defiance. Cities turned to glass, yet the skies alive with human fire. Orbital dropships falling like rain, not retreating, but descending into hell with fury and song. The watchers gasped. Not at the destruction, but at the humans. They fought in silence, lips moving, but no sound escaping. Orders given through gestures, eyes, instinct. Entire battalions operating as one organism, united not by command, but by purpose. The second log played. The Battle of Europa. A mining colony turned fortress, holding against an empire of trillions. When the walls fell, the humans detonated their own power cores, not out of despair, but to deny their enemy the satisfaction of conquest. Their last recorded transmission echoed through the chamber. We will not kneel. The council members shifted uncomfortably. Some wept. Others looked away. But Viereth did not. She watched. And understood. Because buried within every scene of horror was something deeper. Something most of the galaxy had forgotten. Sacrifice. Loyalty. Love. Humans did not fight because they desired war. They fought because they could not bear the idea of another suffering in their place. The logs continued. Decades, centuries, millennia compressed into images and words. Wars against machines, parasites, cosmic plagues. Moments of quiet courage, medics shielding the wounded, engineers rerouting power to life support at the cost of their own. And again, always that same silence. When the final log ended, the room was still. The holos flickered off. No one spoke. Finally, the director turned toward Viereth. His voice trembled. What are they? Viereth looked at the humans through the observation window on the far wall, sitting quietly in their dormitory, their faces illuminated by dim light. And she answered softly, They are what we forgot how to be. The council did not know what to do with that. Within hours, Word spread beyond the Academy. Across the Galactic network, species watched the leaked footage. For the first time, the universe saw humanity's past without filters. Some recoiled in fear, others in awe. But among the younger cadets, those still unshaped by politics, something changed. They began sitting beside humans in the mess halls. They asked questions. They listened to their stories. And when the next training simulations began, they requested to learn from them. Not just tactics, not weapons, but resilience. The Academy's culture shifted. Peace was still the goal, but now, peace with strength, not complacency. Then came the incident. 3 weeks after the logs were unsealed, the Academy's orbital perimeter was breached. A fleet, rogue mercenaries turned raiders, targeted the station, hoping to ransom the students. The defense grid failed within minutes. Command scrambled to evacuate. But the humans didn't wait for orders. They moved. Silent, coordinated, efficient. They seized control of abandoned drone units, rewired training weapons, and reactivated obsolete defense turrets using improvised power lines. The instructors tried to stop them, to remind them they were cadets, not soldiers. But one human simply looked up and said, "With respect, ma'am, we've been soldiers since we learned to walk." The raiders broke through the docking ring. And that's when the galaxy learned what the phrase, human silence, really meant. No war cries. No threats. Just motion. Precise. Unstoppable. In minutes, the attackers were routed. Not through superior numbers, but through sheer audacity. Humans used decompression blasts as traps, gravity locks as weapons, oxygen lines as incendiaries. They fought not to kill, but to end it swiftly. When it was over, the halls were littered with debris and smoke. And through it all, the humans moved among the wounded, friend and foe alike, binding wounds, offering water, stabilizing the dying. When the Council's relief fleet arrived, the battle was already done. Every cadet who had doubted humanity now stood in silent reverence. Even the instructors, who had feared them, now saluted them. Later, when asked why they acted without orders, the human lead cadet only said, "Because we've seen what happens when no one does." That recording would be replayed across 1,000 worlds. The humans were no longer the quiet ones. They became something greater. A reminder. A mirror. A warning. The Academy reinstated them, not as cadets, but as instructors, teachers of tactics, survival, and the art of compassion under fire. The Areth, who had once feared them, became their ally. She spent years studying their psychology, their stories, their contradictions. And in time, she wrote a single line that entered galactic doctrine. Humanity is not defined by war, but by the silence between wars where they remember what it cost. Centuries later, when monuments were raised to honor the Peace Corps, one stood taller than the rest. A sculpture of a human cadet, sitting quietly, hands folded, eyes downcast. Beneath it, a plaque. They were quiet not because they feared war, but because they carried it within them. And beneath that, a final line, one that echoed through every star system that dared to remember Earth's legacy. And so, the stars learned to fear the sound of human silence.